This is USCHO Weekend Review. And here is your host, Ed Trefsker.
Welcome to USCHO Weekend Review for Monday, January 19th, 2026. I'm Ed Trefsker alongside Jim Conley and Derek Schooley. This podcast is sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Las Vegas. Visit ncaa.com/mfrozen4 for tickets. Well, probably the biggest series on the weekend has to be last week's number 4 Michigan State sweeping number 2 Wisconsin on the road in Madison 4-3 and 4-1. So a big deal, top 5 matchup, big points on the line in the Big Ten, but also 0.2 points, 1.2 multiplier for winning on the road for Michigan State. So that helps them a ton in the NPI. This is huge. And so let's first talk about the hockey and then maybe about some of the implications.
Well, I think the hockey, I loved the way that Michigan State was able to really control long spurts throughout that weekend. And that shows to me that this Michigan State team is playing really good hockey right now. I had some concerns. They've had some bumps in the road of late. They were, preseason, we all loved them. But of late, just a small setbacks. This really puts you on the right path as you're really getting into the heart of your Big Ten schedule. You know that you have to get some big wins down the stretch here, not just to maybe win a Big Ten championship, but to position yourself, earn that number 1 seed in an NCAA tournament. Those are what I think right now Michigan State is really focused on, and this is a really good weekend to get them on the right track.
The one thing that we long-time watchers, listeners to our program over the years will remember us saying is you want to sweep at home, split on the road. And anytime you can get a sweep on the road, wow, what does that do for you? What does that do for you in your confidence? Now you're going on the road, you've played with points. Really, the new kind of motto is if you can get 4 of 6 points on the road, it's massive for you because you're taking the home ice advantage away from them. You've climbed in the standings because those are their home games. But to get 6 of 6 when it's top 5 teams, this to me puts Michigan State back in the mix for, I think we kind of forgot about them a little bit. You mentioned they had some bumps in the road. We've talked about everybody, Western doing well, Michigan. We've talked about Providence climbing. We talk about all these teams climbing. We kind of forgot a little bit about Michigan State. That was their statement. They're back. They're still a top 4 team, 5 team. They're on the cusp of.
And maybe we forgot about Trey Augustine too. He was fantastic this weekend. Just looking through some of the save highlights of what he was able to accomplish, he was fantastic.
You mentioned forgetting about him, but I think maybe they've continued to be right up there for me because one thing we have to remember is every team's going to have some bumps in the road, and better to have those bumps in December and January and get things straightened out down the line. But, if you did have any doubts, this weekend ought to cement things for you. I really like this Michigan State team, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Frozen Four in our Wednesday podcast when we talk about buy or sell. But I think that or maybe we're talking about it today. Maybe I should pick that up.
No, it's Wednesday. It's
okay.
Wednesday.
Yeah, it's Wednesday.
I'll only pick that up again.
You'll clear.
We're going to talk. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about in buy or sell, but I think that's really positioning things for the Big Ten to possibly have 3. Can you imagine 4? Didn't the WCHA do that about 20 years ago? They had 4 teams in the Frozen Four in Boston. I think they're positioning themselves well, but I think it's Michigan State kind of getting back to being Michigan State. But now you've got a real horse race in the Big Ten, Michigan State, Wisconsin, all going for the league title. That ought to be fun down the stretch.
Yeah, I think that's in you noticed what you didn't even mention Penn State in there. They had a good weekend against Notre Dame, got the points they're supposed to get, got the 2 wins. We're almost forgetting about Penn State suddenly. You say we forgot about Michigan State. We forgot about the Nittany Lions a little bit here too.
And you know what? I was looking at the NPI today, and one of the teams that gets you bonus points is Ohio State. You know, the Buckeyes could go on a run. That's the thing with league championships. Maybe you get 4 teams that are already going to be in no matter what, and you get a 5th team that wins the league. That still could happen.
That's a great point, Jimmy, you made about Penn State. They're in second place in the Big Ten. They're in second place by a point over Michigan State and 3 points over Wisconsin with the same number of games. They're only 6 points behind Michigan, and they have 2 games in hand. So great point by you on that one.
How about number 1 Michigan? They got 5 out of 6 points on the road at Minnesota. We didn't mention Minnesota. I don't know if it's time to write off the Gophers or for them to make a run in the Big Ten playoffs. But it's the first weekend without Jack Ivankovic. They still get 5 out of 6 points. Stephen Peck had a good weekend. It doesn't seem like they're going to miss a beat right now.
No, Stephen Peck was serviceable, good. Even, I didn't feel like he had to make a lot of massive saves. As I was kind of going through and looking at some highlights from the weekend, there was a lot more coming out of Trey Augustine's crease than Stephen Peck's. The defense in front of him played really well, especially in game 1. I thought that Minnesota had good pushback in game 2, and that was when we saw the real performance from Michigan. I thought that Michigan in game 2 was even better than maybe game 1. This team's playing really well right now. And when you have this, you find ways to win an overtime game on the road on Saturday. I know that we have to be concerned that Ivankovic isn't there. And now I'm starting to hear some rumblings, maybe postseason, he's back, right? Maybe the Big Ten playoffs or the NCAA tournament, that would be good. But if this offense keeps scoring, 8 goals in 2 games this weekend, they were averaging 5 a game almost. I don't worry too much about Michigan, no matter who's in that.
Well, the one thing we talked last week about them buckling down a little bit defensively, which obviously giving up only 3 goals on the weekend, they did. But it's also great when you have the puck. You don't have to buckle down defensively if you have the puck and you play offense and you score. So 91 save percentage, 226 goals against. I think they'd be more than ecstatic with that continuing. Because right now they're scoring 4 a game. And if they don't, they're still getting 3. The old saying, and it's a saying that every coach uses, the race to 3. And if you're only giving up 1 or you're only giving up 2, race to 3 when you're scoring 4 and you're scoring 5 when you're averaging that amount, it's pretty easy to win hockey games. So they buckled down defensively while continuing to score, and they found a way to win a 3-2 overtime game as well. I mean, tough turnover on the overtime winning goal. But that being said, you make your luck sometime.
How about Providence? I saw a media opportunity last week with Nate Lehman, and 2 things he talked about was the volatility of the NPI and also talking about transfer portal stuff and so forth. But with the NPI, it's been so volatile. They've been up and down. They're now 12 in the NPI after sweeping BC 4-3 on the road in OT and 4-3 at home at Schneider Arena. But what you've spotted in there, Jim, is how there's quite a bit of a gap. You've got the bubble teams, and then you have a bunch of teams below that. I think part of that has to do with the bonus you get for 51 and above. So the good teams that are already 51 and above that have wins over good teams, there's almost a multiplicative thing there. But that was really, really big for Providence, and big maybe even for Hockey East and their hopes to get more teams in the postseason. But the Friars right now, you got to feel good about them, and also a little concerned with BC, even though they had teams around them lose.
Yeah, no. Providence, really settled things down here in the last 4 games. A great sweep of Maine, and then 2 more, basically taking 11 out of 12 points out of the last 2 weekends. When you have these 2 circled on the calendar as Maine, BC, really 2 very difficult challenges. I like the way that Providence handled things. They took advantage of uncharacteristic mistakes by BC on both sides. bad turnovers on the defensive side led to a lot of Providence's goals and scoring this weekend, including the game winner on Friday night. I have one concern about Providence, and it's their discipline right now. They took a lot of bad penalties this weekend, and BC scored a lot of power play goals. Not enough. 5-on-5, I thought Providence was by far the better team. I don't think that they can keep taking these penalties and getting away with it. That's the one concern Nate Lehman really needs to clean.
Little streak they're on since they lost at Fairbanks has been very noticeable, especially with losing their goalie. We spent a whole episode last week about a new goalie coming in. Is he going to be the guy? Who's going to be the guy? And Parsons goes out and wins both games. So I don't know if there's a goalie controversy or they're going that direction, but it didn't seem to hurt them. And the one thing, like you said, Ed, with the big little disparity, the little big bit of gap between the two teams is how bad does that loss to Fairbanks feel right now, especially the way they're playing? Yeah. Am I wrong in my NPI math that loss could be a big differential between teams as they go down the stretch here?
Well, here's you're right, Derek, but here's the good news for Providence, and it was what Ed was kind of highlighting. When you look at the NPI right now, and if you're watching the podcast, we'll throw the NPI up on the screen. The distance from Providence to St. Cloud is the first team outside the bubble. So the difference from 12 to 16 is 1.8 in the NPI. If you take 1.8 further, so from St. Cloud, you have to go all the way down to 31 or 32 in the NPI to find that same gap again. So Providence has a really good, solid ground right now. Would it be even better if they had beat Fairbanks? Absolutely. But their NPI ground got a lot better this weekend. Ironically, too, we didn't mention this, Boston College loses those two games and they moved up in the NPI. It had to do a lot with the teams around them not doing well this weekend and them falling. But BC, you have to take the 40% that they got on Friday night at home to lose in overtime was big. And that's one thing as I sit here and look at the NPI, going from 67% and 33% split for an overtime win-loss to 60-40 really doesn't impact a loss in overtime as much as it used to. And I think is really what keeps BC in a good position in the NPI, despite the fact that they lost two games this weekend.
Quick hits, Sacred Heart and Bentley. Sacred Heart got 4 out of 6 points from the Falcons, trimming the gap at the top of Atlantic hockey. They rallied from both 3-0 down and 4-3 down to get a tie, and then overtime in that, or not tie in overtime, and then a shootout point, but which they lost the shootout point to Bentley. But it's going to be a horse race there. It kind of felt like Bentley was running away with it, and they still have a gap. But Bentley, Sacred Heart, and Holy Cross are all in the midst of that. But Holy Cross had a little stumble as they lost 5-2 on the second night to Air Force. But that's a league where sometimes you have somebody run away with it, but it usually comes down to the last weekend to see where everybody's going to end up. Teams can move 4 or 5 places in the standings when it comes to the last weekend of the season. Probably not much to add there, but how about the CCHA? St. Thomas, Augustana, and Michigan Tech all with big weekends. Michigan Tech with that sweep of Minnesota State that really stood out to me, but St. Thomas sweeping Bemidji is pretty big. Augustana continues to roll, and they got a sweep over Ferris State. The top of the CCHA and right into the middle, things are pretty close, and you can have big swings. But if you had to pick a CCHA favorite today, who's it going to be? I think it's got to be one of those 3 teams. Maybe you throw Minnesota State in there, but I have mine, but I'll let you guys go first.
Yeah,
First of all,
I'm really high on. Oh, go ahead, Derek.
I wanted to go back, Ed. You kind of went over real quick the Atlantic hockey. The one thing to watch real quick is the unbalanced schedule. The Eastern teams play each other 4 times when they only play the teams on the West twice. Bentley, Sacred Heart, and Holy Cross still have to all play each other again. that's where it's going to come down to who takes those points. And there is a little separation, but once again, we've always talked about teams beating each other. Does that give another team a chance who doesn't play them to climb up into that mix? So that's something to watch there. As far as the other one, I would say, as far as the CCHA, I would say you're looking at Augustana and St. Thomas right now as the horse race that people are really intrigued by, because they're the new teams, because they're not literally supposed to be there yet, but they are. And that's pretty cool to see a new team. And obviously you got new buildings in both places. You got St. Thomas going to the NCHC. There's a lot of, I think the word you used, Jimmy, in our show notes, chaos. And I think that's where it's at. So there's a lot more to go on it. So those are my favorites.
And it's good chaos, right? I love this right now in the CCHA. You said it, two new teams, two newer faces in Augustana and St. Thomas. There's also the Augustana hook of, if they get into an NCAA tournament, don't forget a regional is being played in their hometown of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Even though they're not the host, maybe they'll get to play there. That's tuned into bracketology later in the week for that one. But Michigan Tech's statement this weekend was pretty big. I had lost track of Michigan's Tech, admittedly. I had not been following, and realized now they're right in the mix. And this is a good team. They opened eyes this weekend going into Minnesota State, getting 2 wins on the road. They're playing really good hockey. So as much as I love talking about Augustana and St. Thomas, I can't forget about Michigan Tech. This team is going to be there right down the stretch.
And if Bowling Green wouldn't have lost to Lake Superior on Saturday at home, you'd have a 36, 35, 34, 33 top 4 right now, without Minnesota State in that mix. So I mean, we could say what ifs and where it is, but that's something that really could come back to bite Bowling Green as they're chasing that home ice and potentially a league standings. Chaos is a great word, Jimmy.
And I think the rest of the league is going to want to see St. Thomas lose at some point, because I don't think any of them would be happy to see St. Thomas win the CCHA on their way out the door to the NCH.
It reminds me of Notre Dame being the only representative in 2017 from Hockey East in the Frozen Four when they were a lame duck member heading to the Big Ten.
One last one, the Alaska Governor's Cup. 1-1 tie. Anchorage won the shootout, and then a 4-1 win for Fairbanks. These two teams, though, because they're independents and they got to put together a schedule, and nobody's playing independents in the leagues hardly at all the rest of the way through. And because of travel, they're going to play 6 more times before the end of the season. So if it wasn't already a rivalry, it's going to be just bitter disgust toward each other by the end of the season.
I mean, Derek, you're a coach. Give me the coach's perspective. What is it like to play an opponent that many times? This is more than a Stanley Cup playoff series. Those are only 7 games. This is 8.
Way back in the old CHA days at the end, we played each other 6 times. And it was way, way, way too much. I mean, 4 times seems like a lot. We're going to play Canisius 4 times over like 4 weeks or 3 weeks. But can you imagine the same team over and over and over again? That's why it gets a little heated. Not only the fact that you're playing for the Governor's Cup, but an 8-game series, that's going to be a challenge. The one thing I will say with this whole thing, then they may face for a 9th time in the independent playoffs, which are in St. Louis. Can you imagine it end up being a best of 9? I mean, it comes down to it. So you're going to see all these independents play each other moving forward, and they just have to. I saw Brendan Riley was at our game at West Point this weekend and they're preparing for a 12-day trip into Alaska. So Long Island's going to be up there just to give the two of them a break playing each other.
But the crazy thing about it too, something I didn't realize till I was doing some research, Alaska Anchorage has not won the Governor's Cup since 2009. So it's been quite some time. They got that shootout win on the first day. I don't even know how they count up and award the cup. Is it based on total points? did Alaska Anchorage get a win and that's a 1-1 series? Now, I'm not even sure. That's for neither here nor there, but it's been a long time for the team from Anchorage here. Fairbanks has dominated this series.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, some of the news of the week, including a fight and a fight over the fight afterwards, a contract extension, and an adjustment to the transfer portal. We're sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Las Vegas.
I'm Cole Caulfield, and I played college hockey.
I'm Adam Fox, and I played college hockey.
I'm Jake Gensel, and I played college hockey.
I'm Cale McCarr, and I played college hockey.
Whether you are a fan or a player, nothing compares to college hockey.
And we're back with USCHO Weekend Review. The fight, that was joy for the fans online and in the arena. UMass Lowell's Connor Eddy and BU's Sasha Boisvert. Matching minors late in the game. They're in the penalty box together, and I guess there was already a little bit of planning ahead of time. Exit the box, drop the gloves, start throwing some haymakers. An old-fashioned fight like you might see in juniors or the AHL, I guess. So they got automatic game disqualifications, which comes with it a game suspension. But where there has been some controversy, at least among fans and maybe among us, Hockey East added 2 extra games for each player on Sunday for a total of 3 games, and a rarity in the press release, actually a comment from League Commissioner Steve Metcalf saying it has no place in college hockey. Now, that's kind of a boilerplate quote, but why that stands out to me is usually those releases are very perfunctory and don't say anything else and just usually say they've been suspended and the league considers this matter closed. So, first of all, obviously the rule book has the DQ and a game suspension, but what about the supplemental discipline? Was that right? Was that too much?
I'll start here and jump in. I'm okay with adding another game. 2 is a lot, and I only put it into the perspective of a 34-game season. To lose 3 out of 34 for one incident seems a little excessive. But if you're Steve Metcalf and you're Brian Murphy, they're head of officials, and you're trying to figure this out, and you're saying, okay, if we let this one go and we just give the 1 game, do we see more of this? And does this become more commonplace? If we give it 2 more games, we make it 3 games total that you're missing. Does that really kind of at least maybe put something in the back of a player's mind? I don't want to do this because I don't want the suspension. This is one where if you're Lowell, you made out on the trade-off. Even though BU came back and won the next night, Lowell won that game on Friday when those 2 players were out of the game. Boisvert is one of the best players for Boston University. Not that Eddie's not a good player for Lowell. He's an older player, so he's a leader on that team. But I guess the league, in my opinion, really just tried to send a message here.
Well, I could tell you, they got their money's worth. That was a good fight. That was old-fashioned. And they had people talking. I know our players were talking about it on the bus. I think the biggest thing is you have so many players coming from the CHL. You have so many new players into college hockey. I think the rule is in place, and it's a good rule. So the first time you get a game DQ, 1 game, no matter what it is. Second time you get a game DQ, it's 2 games. So there's a built-in, if you think that you're trying to send a message, they don't do it again. There's a built-in ramification for a second DQ. Agree with you a little bit, Jimmy. I think 2 games is much because you've got the 1 game built in. If the college hockey wanted it to be a more than a 1 game suspension, they would change the rule book. And so I would say I can see being premeditated them coming out of the box and fighting, giving them an extra game. To say we don't want that. We don't want what happened with Arizona State and Fairbanks, guys coming out of the penalty box during scrums, all that stuff. We don't want that. This is a different thing. This was while the play was going on. I think like what you said, one more game, nobody would bat an eye at that. 2 games, 9% of your schedule. You said almost 10, 9% of your schedule. That's a lot. And that's a lot for NHL draft picks when you're trying to say, when you're trying to say, come to college hockey, but then something like that that's spontaneous, because obviously they had to be going back and forth in the penalty box. You'd love to hear an audio of that, of what was going on between the penalty boxes. But does that deter CHL players going? Does it deter fighting? Probably, for sure. But does it deter people that go, ooh, because in the NHL, these draft picks, they want to play in the National Hockey League. They're coming here to get bigger, stronger, faster, play against men, but it's also an emotional sport. It's also a physical sport. Does that change that? So I love Steve. We all do. He's a friend of the show. He's a friend of ours. I agree with adding a supplemental discipline on. I think 2 might have just been a tad high, my opinion.
I'm going to agree with the league on this. If I'm allowed to drop in a comment here, I will definitely put in with
You're
the
just
league on
sucking
this,
up to
because you want
Steve.
No, because you want to nip this in the bud. And I'm also remembering back 18 seasons ago, if I'm doing the math right, this is 2026. RIT and Canisius, about this time in the season, had basically a line brawl. Canisius had a player push aside the penalty box attendant and come back out on the ice. One goalie went to the other end of the ice. The league watched the video over and over again. In fact, I had to write an apology letter to the commissioner of the league at the time, because they were watching it with my play-by-play. And I had been saying in the game, if they don't get this under control, there's going to be a brawl. And then I flat out said, yeah, there was the brawl, and I called out the commissioner in that. So I wrote him a note and said I still stand by everything. But all that to say, they had a lot more than just 1 game or 2 games in that. Some players got 9 games, basically the rest of the regular season. The player who came out of the penalty box was suspended, including the playoffs. So they added a lot of supplemental discipline because of that. And I think that, so if this had been a spur of the moment thing, somebody's goalie gets run into or somebody gets cheap shotted and you're standing up for them, and it was one of those spontaneous type of fights, then maybe there wouldn't even have been supplemental, and maybe another game might have been worthwhile. But in this case, where you're planning the whole thing out, you're one of the rings in a 3-ring circus rather than something that comes from the flow of the game. So I'm going to support the league in this, because I think the difference in premeditation makes the difference in what the penalty should.
By the way, was I the only one that was surprised when I heard about this fight to realize it was 2 players that did not play in the CHL? When I saw you had a BU Lolo, a big fight, I assumed it was going to be CHL players. Neither one, at least one of the players, was going to be from the CHL. Neither one came from the CHL.
I think there's a big difference between a line brawl and 2 players fighting. I think that there's a massive difference in that. I can count on one hand, and I've been doing this for 22 years as a head coach and 6 as an assistant. I can count on one hand the amount of fights that we've had in games. And I just think 3's an awful lot of games. Does that disparage people from college hockey? Does it disparage fighting? Absolutely. But sometimes it happens. Sometimes it's just, and at least this was a real fight. It wasn't the shadow boxing or walker boxing.
Face washing.
Yeah.
Well,
this at least was a real fight.
This was a lot of individual. So
I guess we can go back and forth. I think it's still one game.
When I'm referencing that historical one, there were a lot of, it was people pairing off and so forth. And with the goalies, the Canisius goalie went the length of the ice to take on the other goalie. both of them away from the rest of the fight. They each got 9 games out of that. I think that was probably excessive, and I did at the time, and I know the teams appealed it and the league said no, but I don't think it's unprecedented when you have something that's out of order. Maybe I wouldn't say 9 for these guys. I don't have a problem with 2. I might have a problem with 3, but basically you're saying, okay, you're sitting for a weekend.
But does this happen in all the leagues? How many fights have there been this year? How many fighting DQs have there been that you have to say, okay, or is this just a one-off? That's
well, I hope that's the thing. They want it to be a one-off, I think. And by making this statement, they're saying there's zero tolerance here. So anyway, we'll probably hear from Steve on that.
He doesn't even grade us anymore.
Maybe we'll get a direct phone call. Who knows? Brandon Naurato at Michigan got a 4-year contract extension. So he's locked in for the rest of the decade. He came in as an interim head coach, but it looks like he's done a pretty good job. And, from a recruiting standpoint, this is pretty big. There's no uncertainty there right now. You know who your bench boss is going to be. That's got to help out there. I think the jury was still out when he was named the interim head coach. A lot of people had good things to say about him. He did a terrific job his first season. From what we hear, changed a lot of culture. This seems both a good move for Michigan and well-deserved for him.
Certainly. And you said it, Ed. I don't know that we all would have thought that when he was named interim coach that we would still be talking about him at the end of this decade. But now with this contract extension, we absolutely will be. And it may be longer than that. He's doing a great job of building, and he's showing that he can remain nimble. Listen, Michigan is going to be able to draw the best players to their school. So I don't want to say that he's doing a great job recruiting. It's an easier job to recruit to a Michigan than it is to say, let's go northern Michigan. I'll go to the opposite end of the spectrum. A lot easier to get to the Ann Arbor. But you still have to be nimble. You still have to adjust. He and his staff have proven the ability to adjust this season especially. They're doing a good job. They've brought in the right players. They somehow are being able to, even through adversity, find success. And I think that that's a big formula for what Naurato has did. And that's why he has this extension.
I'll leave it short. 2 straight Frozen Fours. That's an easy call. There should have just been done after the Frozen Four. Congratulations.
And it gets the coaching controversy off the plate in one sport while they deal with some craziness in another sport, as in football. So I'm sure that's a big relief for the athletic department to have somebody solid and get him inked. One last thing to hit on with news is the transfer portal, going from a 45-day window to 15-day window. And as I was thinking about this, one thing that came to mind was a couple of years ago, a coach talking about how, well, if you aren't already talking to a player in January, then you're not going to get them when the portal comes. So basically, if you're not tampering with a player now, you're not going to have a chance at him. And I'm using that word tampering. Maybe it's a little strong, but I'm going to use it. My first thought on this is a couple of things, and you guys can pick up from here. One, it gets rid of a lot of uncertainty, and maybe two, because it's short, maybe prevent some players who see what else has happened and maybe decide to stick their toe in the water. But what are your perspectives on this? I especially would like to hear from Derek on this, because this affects you a ton.
We had meetings as a coaching body and talked about it through a couple conference calls through our leagues. There were a couple different proposals that we looked at. We were kind of following the lead of basketball. They went to it as well. Obviously, there's a provision in there for a coaching change. There's a couple different aspects, but I think it cleans things up. It makes it shorter. 45 days is just way too long. I think it keeps people on campus. They have to make a decision here while they're here, instead of going home and then going, so-and-so called me while I was at home. At least you're on campus. You can have legitimate conversations with your players. I don't see it being a big difference. If you're going to go in the portal, you're going to go in the portal. You can't stop it. Like you said, I hate to use the word tampering, but there's shopping. Let's put it that way. There's players being shopped all around. I think there was an article already out there where there were coaches quoted as saying that people are being tampered with. I know some schools have transfer portal lists of people they think are going into the portal right off the bat. So I think this makes it cleaner, makes it shorter, less chaos. It happens right after the Frozen Four. It's over before we go to the convention in Florida. You could be in the portal. You can recruit from the portal. It doesn't change any of that. You just have 15 days to go, and you don't have that time to make a decision. You still have as long as you want to make a decision, but you have 15 days to decide if you're going in. People usually know before if they're going into the portal.
Yeah, this is totally fair. I think it makes the life of a coach a little bit easier, and not even easier, just more sane. I just think that 45-day window, you think you get through the first 2-3 weeks and you feel like you know where you're headed. And then, at the end, suddenly you have another couple of guys jump in the portal, or guys jump in the portal that you didn't expect and you weren't in position to bring guys in. This should organize the whole process a little bit more. And I think it, as you kind of alluded to, Derek, it's fair. This is the way you keep the influence really between the player and the campus. You don't have as much going home, starting your off season, off campus, getting a lot of outside influence, and then making your decision. I like the thought that they're making this decision rather quickly.
And it still does give you room if a coaching change happens, but most of those are going to happen by when this starts, which is the Monday after the Frozen Four, instead of after the regionals, which really was kind of a mess for teams in the Frozen Four too, and probably part of keeping it longer. Seems like it makes sense. It's going to be interesting to see what happens as we get into the first year after all this, and after all the fifth year of eligibility and everything, and after the implementation of CHL, things may be a little bit more calm. And I think one thing that may influence some players is, unless you're really somebody who's making a big leap, somebody who was a diamond in the rough, a lot of these players have got to be finding that the grass isn't greener. Maybe you go up a level of team and then you're not getting into games as much. Maybe you're on the bench a lot. Maybe you were a first line guy on one team and now you're on the third line, and you could argue you're not being helped at all. So maybe this will help stem some of that too. And I guess I'm pointing some fingers here too. I think that family advisors have got to step back and take a look at this stuff too, because I think they're giving some players some bad advice. Players who have no NHL potential being told that, well, if you go to this other team, then you'll get a look. So you got players moving to other teams. They're going to end up playing in the E or maybe the A at best anyway. So there are a lot of people to point fingers at here. This is something I've been watching up close and personal. So anything that settles it down and makes it less chaotic, I think, is a good. And I guess we'll leave it at that. This episode has been sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Las Vegas. NCAA.com/MFrozen4. We do this on video as well as audio. YouTube.com/USCHO. Please like and subscribe. We'd love it if everybody who listens would go over and subscribe to the YouTube, even if you don't watch it that often. We're trying to get to the next threshold, and every little bit helps. For Jim Connolly, for Derek Schooley, I'm Ed Trefsker, and this has been USCHO Weekend Review.